Would you have the courage to look at what was behind the mirror? She had, and since then, he has never slept in peace again. The photo looked old, but what was in it was still alive. Footsteps in the hallway, doors that opened by themselves, and a secret that no one wants to remember. But now it's too late. You've seen it. And what she saw, she can see you too. Altavilla is a small town in the interior of Pará, one of those where everyone knows at least the surname of the neighboring family. A stuffy place where time seems to move slower and the days have a silence that sometimes becomes uncomfortable. In 1992, Dona Sônia decided to start over there, alone, after the end of a troubled relationship. He rented a simple house with wooden windows and cold cement floors in the city center. The building was old, but in good condition. The broker assured that there was nothing wrong with the property, just a previous resident who moved out in a hurry years ago. Sônia didn't care. She just wanted peace. Little did she know that when she opened the door to that house, she was entering something that would never leave her alone again. In the first few days, the adaptation went well. Sônia cleaned each room with dedication, trying to erase the traces of the previous owner. A moldy closet, dusty curtains, and a large mirror in the living room, which seemed too heavy to be so well attached to the wall. It was an antique mirror, framed in dark wood, with the glass slightly stained around the edges, as if it carried time within it. During cleaning, when Sônia passed the cloth behind the frame, she noticed that the mirror was moving. One corner of the wood seemed to be loosely fitted, and there was something behind it. Curious, she pulled carefully, feeling a loose piece of paper. It was a photograph, aged, with yellowed edges and a strong, musty smell. The image showed a girl standing in front of a wooden fence with a blank expression and hands folded in front of her dress. She didn't smile. He just stared. There was something strange about that photo. Sônia couldn't say exactly what, but she felt immediate discomfort. It was like I was invading something I shouldn't have. She thought about throwing it away, but hesitated. For some reason he couldn't. He placed the image on the shelf and continued cleaning. However, at night, the restlessness returned. While she was having dinner alone, she thought she heard a slight crack coming from the living room. When he went to check, the mirror was as before, still, but the photograph was on the floor, facing upwards. Even after replacing it, this happened again in the following days. Always at night. Always when the house seemed quieter than it should have been. As the days went by, the noises intensified. Light first steps, then the creak of a door opening on its own at the end of the hallway. Sônia tried to rationalize. It could be the wood expanding with heat, air currents, imagination. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. Everything happened when she was alone, always at the same time. And it always started in the living room where the mirror was, and the photo. He started avoiding her. He turned her back and locked the door. Still, when he woke up, the girl's image reappeared in another corner, visible, as if she was trying to show off, to get noticed. The feeling was clear. That child wanted something. And now, Sônia was sure. That wasn't just a forgotten photo. She tried to investigate discreetly. He took the photograph to an older neighbor, Mrs. Dalva, who had lived there for decades. When she saw the image, Dalva turned pale. "Where did you find this?" he asked, his voice shaking. Sônia explained. The woman hesitated for a moment, then returned the photo without saying anything else. Changed the subject. The conversation cooled down. The next day, Dona Dalva didn't even open the gate when Sônia tried to come back to talk to her. It was then that the feeling that something was very wrong began to grow, because in that neighborhood where everyone greeted each other on the street, no one looked Sônia in the eye anymore, and every time she mentioned the photo, Silence was the only response. Sônia began to avoid the room. The mirror, which before was just an old object, now seemed like a fixed point of something she couldn't explain. It wasn't fear exactly. It was as if that silent presence was taking shape. Everything revolved around. Photography. She even kept it in a drawer, but in an inexplicable way, the image appeared again in visible places, on top of the refrigerator, on the chair in her room, once even on the bathroom floor, as if to say, "Don't hide from me." It was the same girl, eyes still, hands clasped, hair tied back with a ribbon. A detail that had previously gone unnoticed now caught attention. The girl's shadow fell in the opposite direction to the natural light in the image. Small, almost imperceptible. But wrong. Something was out of place. The demonstrations were not limited to the sound of footsteps or creaking doors. Things started disappearing. Firstly, small objects, a spoon, a sock, a pan lid, then the house key. Sônia searched the entire place, and nothing. Hours later, the key appeared, exactly on top of the photograph. Always her, as if everything was being directed to that point, to that figure. One night, as she walked past the living room in the dark, Sônia saw her own reflection in the mirror, but there was someone else there, a small silhouette behind her. When he turned on the light, there was nothing, just the echo of her heart beating in her chest and the certainty that she was no longer alone in there. She stopped sleeping properly. I had nightmares. In one of them, I walked through an empty, dark field until I reached a wooden fence, just like the one in the photo. The girl was on the other side, motionless, pointing at something behind Sônia. She turned around, but couldn't see what it was. I woke up sweating with uneven breathing. He started leaving lights on around the house and the television on, even without watching it. Anything to avoid silence. But even with all this, at 3 a.m. sharp, the living room door always made the same noise. 3 clicks, as if someone was trying to open it, slowly, testing the patience of the listener. Desperate for answers, Sônia decided to take the photo to an old stationery store in the city where a man called Mr. Alzides worked with image development and restoration. He analyzed the paper, the coloring, the wear. He said the photo was from the 70s, maybe a little earlier. But what caught his attention was something that only appeared in brighter light. There were fingerprints on the back of the photo, and they weren't recent. They had been absorbed into the paper over time, and they were blurry, as if the person holding the photo was shaking. He didn't want to give an opinion, but he let slip a phrase that kept echoing in Sônia's mind. There are things we should leave where they were. She left the stationery store feeling like she was carrying a dead body in her pocket. That image, that girl, they weren't just part of an old memory. There was something alive, present, something that crossed time and space and kept trying to communicate. But what? With whom? Why? The only thing Sônia knew for sure was that, since finding that photo, her life had stopped being normal. Reality was starting to distort. And somehow this was all just beginning. Sônia could no longer bear the silence of the people around her. After Dona Dalva's reaction and the looks avoided by the neighbors, she began to wonder if that was just a coincidence, or if there was a truth that everyone there already knew. She returned to the municipal police station with the intention of registering a report, but was hesitant to share the supernatural details. Instead, he discreetly asked if there were reports of disappearances involving children in previous years. The attendant consulted old files and shook his head. Unfortunately, yes. 7 cases between 1987 and 1993. All similar, boys between 8 and 13 years old, all living on the outskirts. Some were never found. Others were found in disturbing circumstances with marks that the police preferred not to disclose publicly. Brief descriptions in the official report spoke of ritualized violence, but the terms were vague. One of the mothers, according to a forgotten footnote, said in testimony, "They took my son to a light, but he never came back." That kept ringing in Sonia's head. Who was behind these disappearances? And why didn't anyone talk about it anymore? In the local press, old reports mentioned the disappearances evasively. No investigation appeared to have reached a solid conclusion. No arrests, no definitive conviction, just rumors. Many families moved out of the city shortly after the crimes. Others were silenced out of fear. Afraid of who exactly? Driven by an impulse that is difficult to explain, Sonia decided to visit one of the houses mentioned in the records, that of the family of one of the missing boys. It was a simple building far from the center, now empty and overgrown with vegetation. The gate was rusty and half open. As he entered, he felt a shiver run down his spine. The house seemed frozen in time. There were still old toys scattered around the yard. She entered slowly, feeling as if she were trespassing on something sacred. In the bedroom, a single bed with faded sheets and an open closet. In the corner of the wall, handwritten in faded ink, it read, "They say it's for the best, but they lie." From that moment on, Sonia was sure that the photograph and the disappearances were linked. The apparently peaceful city hid a past that no one wanted to revisit. She tried to share her findings with a small local newspaper, but the reporter who answered her changed his expression as soon as she mentioned the years between 87 and 93. He thanked her but refused to publish anything. "This story has already cost too many lives. It's not worth digging this hole again," he said, closing his notebook. Whatever had happened, it still provoked fear, even decades later. With each new day, Sonia felt that she was more isolated, and at the same time, closer to something that should never have been unearthed. The photo, now stored inside a folder, seemed heavier, as if absorbing everything around. Everything was getting denser, darker, and what was once just a suspicion now turned into a calling. The city of Altavilla has not forgotten, just hid it, and someone or something seemed to want the truth to come out, whatever it took. As Sonia progressed in the informal investigation, a name began to emerge in the whispers of the few people who still agreed to talk to her. Path of True Light, a supposed spiritualist group that operated in the city in the 80s and early 90s, offering energy healing, cleansing the body and soul, and promises of protection against illness and bad luck. The group's headquarters operated discreetly in the back of a house in a rural area, about 10 kilometers from the center. Officially, it was just a space for prayers, but long-time residents, especially the older ones, referred to the place with a suspicious look and a silence that said much more than any direct answer. According to fragmentary reports, the group was led by a man known as Dr. Arlindo, a doctor who had lost his license years earlier for undisclosed reasons. He presented himself as someone who had special gifts and said that common medicine was limited, that only direct connection with the divine frequency was capable of truly healing. Beside him, the pastor Rubens, a former religious leader who turned away from the traditional church to follow the new doctrine of living light. Together, they attracted desperate people, especially poor families who saw it as a chance to save someone they loved or escape a life marked by hardship. The most disturbing thing in the reports, however, came between the lines. Certain cures required a type of spiritual sacrifice. No one said it outright, but there were whispered stories about offerings left in rituals, which ranged from personal objects, hair, blood, and, in some cases, something more valuable. The children involved in these ceremonies were never seen by their neighbors. They entered in silence, always accompanied by their parents, and then they disappeared. Officially, the group's leaders denied any connection with the disappearances, but the coincidence of times, places, and profiles of the victims was too great to ignore. Sônia managed to locate a former follower of the group who agreed to talk to her on the condition that the meeting took place outside the city in a neighboring village. The woman, named Vera, spoke with a low voice and shaking hands. He said he left the group after witnessing something he could never forget. A night in which a boy was taken to the improvised altar at the back of the warehouse. Arlindo said it was just a symbolic act, a performance to release the family's pain. But when the lights went out and the woman heard the child's muffled scream, she understood that there was nothing symbolic there. Vera tried to alert the authorities at the time, but no one would listen to her. Shortly afterwards, she suffered a car accident. Too strange to be a coincidence, and spent years in fear of being followed. The sect's history had been hushed up, with no bodies, no physical evidence, and with most of the families leaving the city shortly after the disappearances, the police were unable to sustain any charges. Arlindo and Rubens were questioned, but were released due to lack of evidence. The case was closed. The group's headquarters mysteriously caught fire months later, and no one was ever arrested. Sônia, now with all this in hand, felt that she had entered a territory where justice did not reach, and where the truth only survived in the nightmares of those who had the courage to look deeper. But she still didn't know that the worst was yet to come. Even with the disappearance of children, rumors about the sect and frightening testimonies like Vera's, no effective measures were taken. The city seemed to have made a pact of silence. But what bothered Sônia most was not the absence of justice. It was the way everything had been conveniently ignored, files poorly filled out, reports inconclusive, investigations interrupted. It seemed like every time someone tried to go deeper, something or someone came along to stop them. It wasn't just incompetence, it was protection. Protection for whom? That was the question no one dared to answer out loud. But everyone knew who she was referring to. Sônia found an old internal bulletin from the City Hall dated 1991. In it, there was mention of a spiritual welcome project financed by members of the local public authorities, with the name of Dr. Arlindo among those who benefited. The document was incomplete and erased, but it revealed that there was a direct connection between the sect group and important names in the city at the time. When she tried to consult more records, she was met with resistance. The physical files had been lost in a flood. The digital ones were under maintenance. Everything seemed to have been carefully erased. But what surprised her most was when she looked again for the police chief responsible at the time. He had retired prematurely and was now living in a psychiatric clinic in another city. Determined to understand where this story went, Sônia sought out an investigative journalist who had worked on the case in 1993, but had his story censored before publication. The man, with deep-set eyes and slow speech, said he was threatened several times during the investigation. They didn't want the material to come out. And when I say they, I'm not talking about religious people nor simple people. I'm talking about those in charge. The article he wrote was never aired. The chief editor, a friend for years, was transferred, and the file disappeared from the newsroom. This isn't just about some weird cult. It's about power. And when power mixes with fear, the truth becomes the enemy. Little by little, Sônia began to realize that she had crossed a line from which she could no longer return. His steps were being watched. I received silent calls in the middle of the night. Sometimes he had the feeling that someone had entered his house, even though there were no signs of forced entry. Certain documents that I had separated were gone. She tried to seek support outside of there, in larger bodies, but everything seemed to die along the way. Emails received no response. The contacts recommended by Vera pretended not to know what she was talking about. The truth was alive, but buried beneath a thick layer of institutionalized fear, and each new discovery was accompanied by an unspoken warning. It seems, but Sônia didn't stop, because now it wasn't just about the photo anymore. It wasn't about the disappearances anymore. It was about something much bigger that had been hidden for years. She knew she couldn't trust anyone else, but she also knew that if she backed away now, this story would disappear with her, as it disappeared with the others. How he disappeared with the boys, how it disappeared with the truth, and deep down, a certainty grew within her what was yet to come. I wasn't going to let her get away that easily. Sônia decided to leave the city for a few days. The pressure was unbearable. The doors of truth had opened ajar, but the feeling was that something was about to exit through them, not enter. During the trip, he tried to reorganize the information, review the scanned files, but his computer kept crashing and the files wouldn't open. The memory card, containing copies of City Hall documents, was corrupted. On the cell phone, the images from the original photo simply disappeared. It was as if everything around was being gradually erased, like an old tape that dissolves after being played too much. Even far from Altavilla, she continued to hear the cracks. At 3 a.m., I woke up with the same feeling. Someone was there, watching. When he returned, the house looked different. Darker, more stuffy, as if she herself had aged during the days she was empty. The lights flickered frequently. The lock on the front door was scratched. On the living room floor, something made her shudder. The photo. Yes, that same old photo, which she swore she had kept in a folder at the back of her locked wardrobe. It was there again, facing upwards, exactly in the center of the room. The girl looked at the camera with the same expression, but now there was something more. Sônia couldn't say for sure, but the look seemed more direct, more present, as if the girl was aware of who was staring at her at that moment. She started avoiding the room completely. He slept in the back room with the doors locked and a chair leaning against the doorknob. Still, the sound came. 3 clicks, a light knock, a whisper. She couldn't identify the words, but she was sure they were repeated. Always the same. And one late afternoon, when he returned from the market, he found the mirror broken in 1,000 pieces. On the floor, among the shards, the empty frame, and next to it, a note written in charcoal on the wall. She's still waiting. It no longer felt like a warning. It sounded like a sentence. Sônia moved from Altavilla 2 weeks later. He sold what he could, donated the rest, and left without looking back. I never wanted to know about the city again, nor hear about it. But even in another state, in another home, she still feels like you are not alone. Sometimes you wake up to the same sequence of sounds. Other times, objects appear out of place. But what really makes her panic is the envelope she received 2 days ago with no return address, delivered under the door. Inside it, only one thing: the same photograph. The girl, still there, and for the first time, smiling. The case was never reopened. No authorities have reinvestigated Altavilla's disappearances. Names were forgotten, families silenced, traces erased. But anyone who looks at that image for too long is sure there is something alive in there. Something that doesn't belong to that time, something that don't want to be forgotten. And perhaps this story is not over. Perhaps the next step is in the hands of whoever listens to it now. But one thing is certain. If you ever find an old photo where someone stares at you even before you turn to them, maybe it's better not to keep it. Would you have the courage to keep a photo that appeared alone behind the mirror? Tell us in the comments, what would you? And if stories like that capture you, subscribe to the channel. Here, secrets don't stay buried for long.